Okay. So as they said, I did spend some time at Oxford with Robbie Zacharias back in 2017, 2018. So I am officially a Christian apologist, and I know what that means. It means I defend the doctrine of Christianity. I also spent some time in the C.S. Lewis Society, so I'm really big on C.S. Lewis. And we actually, for those of you who would be interested, we actually in Wilmore have a Verum Fabula, if you know Latin, fellowship, a literary society down there where we discuss Lewis and Tolkien on Monday nights. Of course, you guys get this on Monday nights. Never mind. Never mind. If you know anybody else who wants to go, except for you guys. Okay, so they gave me a really small topic to delve into, one that's barely been talked about in the history of the world, the mind. We still don't know a lot about the mind and consciousness, and so I'm going to try to take a few minutes here to pull out a few things, and hopefully you guys will have some questions, and we'll be able to get to more of my stuff in the Q&A. Please have questions. Please have questions, because that's how we learn. Okay, so I'm going to start out with a few scriptures. In Colossians 3, Paul tells us to set your mind on things above, right? Romans 12:2, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, God's pleasing and perfect will. My last opening quote is from Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Any Sherlock fans in here? Crime is common, logic is rare. So you guys came to college, and you guys are going to be going into an environment where they're going to test your analytical skills. Romans tells us don't be conformed to this world. How do we conform ourselves to something? Does anyone know? Can anyone think about a way that you conform to something? You conform to something when you parrot something else. When you learn a specific set of values, a specific set of rules, when you begin to conform to something, you lay hold of something else and you replicate that in your life. Romans is telling us not to conform, telling us to be transformed. What's the benefit of being transformed? Is that you can test. Any science majors out there? You? Okay, come on. Testing your theory is a big deal. You have an hypothesis. What do? You test it to make sure you're not wrong. What I want to do today is I want to try to open up some things to you that you guys begin to look at the way you think and the way that you think about your mind, so that you don't simply conform to what someone is telling you that you should be doing. I want to help you learn how to learn, not what to learn. All right? So we're going to start out with four main little topics here. What is the mind? How does it work? How do we get the best out of it? And how do we maintain a good mind? So very quickly, let's look at what is the mind. From Socrates to Plato, all the way even to J.P. Moreland. If you guys know, I'm going to say some names and some words you might not understand. I'm actually also here to challenge you. Okay, I will try to bring some of the verbiage down, but if you don't know something, write it down. Look it up. That's the only way to learn. Because some of this stuff I've been studying for a while, so I'm still working through it. And so I'm testing this out to see if I have a grasp on it as well. So we're kind of having a conversation here. Your nonverbal cues are telling me if I have a grasp of it or not. So this is kind of like a conversation where you guys don't talk. All right? So this will be fun. So what is the mind? Christianity teaches us that we are a substance. We are two substance. They call it substance dualism, right? That we are a mind or a soul, and we're a body. We are this being, this entity over here, and we are placed inside of a body. We are two things. Okay? The mind, even Plato talked about this, and Plato and Socrates and these guys were actually before Christ. So this concept of substance dualism has been around for a really long time. So think about that for a minute. When you think about yourself, do you think about this only? What happens if you lose an appendage? Did you lose a part of yourself? Are you still whole? What if you lose a part of your brain? Are you still you? Your memories actually go to another part of your brain. If you have brain damage, sometimes your memories will go to another part of your brain and it will still function properly, even though you don't have the same amount of mass that you had before. So, is your body you? Or is your mind you? These are questions that you need to wrestle with. And you're like, why do I need to wrestle with that? We're going to get there, so just hang on. So, what does a mind do? So if you are this mind, what does a mind do? A mind allows you to think about or of something. You're now thinking about what I said because you have a mind to do it. We are the only creatures known in this entire universe to be able to think about something or of something. A dog knows it's hungry. A squirrel knows it wants a nut, but it doesn't know it's the one who wants the nut. The dog doesn't know it's the one that's hungry. It can't contemplate morality. It can't contemplate beauty. It can't contemplate itself. It can't look in a mirror and contemplate its looks. Only humans have the ability to contemplate thinking about or of something. That is no small matter, guys. That is huge. That you have the ability right now to think about something. Now, there are some things that you can't think about. But first, let's look at some things you can think about. So let's push this in for a second, because I really want you guys to understand what your mind can do. How many of you in here can think about a dragon? Not very many. Vampires, wizards, witches, unicorns. Have you ever seen a unicorn? How can you think about a unicorn? How can your mind contemplate something you've never seen before? Imagination, right? Your mind is made up of two things. Imagination and reason are the two things that are inside of your mind. Imagination is the material with which you use reason to create images and thoughts that you want to express. Now think about this, guys. So then we call this consciousness, being self-aware. What I'm talking about is being self-aware. You guys are self-aware. No other creature is self-aware. You guys are able to think about things. And being conscious is something that very few people actually get to do and do well. So I want you guys to really concentrate on, I'm self-aware. What do I do with this self-awareness now that I have it? So you guys can think about anything on this earth, right? Can you think about history? You weren't there. How can you think about history? Can you think about the future? You're not there. How can you think about the future? We are also the only being that can think about being. Get this. We can think about being and contemplate our thinking about being. But we can't do them simultaneously. So I can think about myself standing on stage. I can be standing on stage talking to you and know that I'm talking to you. I can also step out of that moment and come over here and think about me thinking about standing here talking to you. I can have that thought. That's a whole other level of thinking that no other creature on this earth can have in thinking. Your mind is extremely powerful. So you can think about anything that is natural on this earth. You can think about anything on this earth that is physical, right? Can you think about anything that is metaphysical? Can you think about anything that actually is beyond the physical? What? Love. You can think about beauty. Ghosts. Yeah, we don't know if those are real or not. So you can think about things that actually are metaphysical as well. Can you contemplate the greatest possible being ever? Can you in your mind right now think of a greatest possible being in your mind? That's God. How can a sentient creature, how can a creature like you be able to contemplate and think about the greatest possible being ever, to think about something that's outside of realm that you've never seen before? C.S. Lewis says, if I have a desire inside of me that nothing in this world can satisfy, it must be that I was made for another world. Our minds are the most powerful things in the universe. Be not conformed. So when you're coming and people are talking to you, and your professors are talking to you, and you're encountering new ideas, be careful not to accept an idea just because someone has it. How many in here like the way you think? You like your thoughts, you like your beliefs. How many? Do you hold on to your thoughts because you have them, or because they're good thoughts? Are you such an amazing thinker that all your thoughts are winners? The answer is no. So, why it's very important for you guys to understand not to conform, because right now in the educational system, from kindergarten all the way up through grammar school and to high school, you guys, and my children as well, are sort of being taught what to learn. Right? You're being told, this is how you respond, this is how you act, this is how you do this. This is socially acceptable. You're being told what to learn without giving the whys. Right? That's how you conform. If you just parrot something, I went to Ravi Zacharias' school and I learned about apologetics. Do you know what the pitfalls of learning apologetics? Is that you learn the arguments, but you don't learn the truth. You can spout off arguments. You can be a parrot of all the arguments. But if you don't know who Jesus Christ is, the arguments won't do you any good. You have to learn how to use the arguments. You have to learn, why do I believe this? So, if I ask you a question of why you believe X about God, would you be able to defend your answer? Or would you just say, I don't know. My church taught me this, or this taught me this, or I believe this about gay marriage, or I believe this about myself, I believe this. What are your beliefs rooted and grounded in? Are they just rooted and grounded in the fact that you believe them because you have them? Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your minds. How do you renew your mind? Challenging it. You have a hypothesis. What do, science majors? You challenge your hypothesis. You try to do what? You try to prove yourself wrong. How many of you take your beliefs and systematically and habitually try to prove yourself wrong? Anybody out there try to prove yourself wrong? Why not? Because you guys have finally come to a place where you feel comfortable that you have calmed the chaos in your life. You have calmed some chaos down in your mind. Because your beliefs are keeping that chaos in. And you're afraid if you challenge it, you actually might be wrong. And then your whole world would spiral out of control. And so you're desperately clinging on to it. And the reason why you're desperately clinging on to it is because in your mind, you have not quieted the chaos. You haven't had the tools to do that. So hopefully tonight, I'm going to teach you some tools that you can use so that you don't have to quiet the chaos out here. So one of the things I've noticed in culture recently is everyone trying to quiet the chaos in front of them, right? Don't say this offends me. Don't do this offends me. You're going to hurt my feelings if you do this. Why are we doing that? It's because the 6 inches between our ears, we don't know how to think. And we hold on, we have this worldview that we've created, this filter we've created, how to see the world, we have it. And if someone touches it, they can fall apart. And if it falls apart, we don't know what we'll do. Because we haven't learned how to think properly or think correctly. So how do we think correctly? One of my favorite fictional characters, probably, if you ask me, Wes, if you could be any fictional character in the entire world, who would you be? I would probably pick Sherlock Holmes, but make a caveat and say, but I'd like to be married to my wife. She would be my Irene Adler, that's for sure. So, Sherlock Holmes. How many of you guys are familiar with Sherlock Holmes? It's funny, he was written in the 1800s and he's still relevant today. Three things Sherlock Holmes did better than any person. He did 3 things. And I'm going to show you a trick here that Conan Doyle did that you didn't know that he did. Sherlock Holmes studied. Did you guys know that? He studied continuously. He spent a third of his life studying. He spent a third of his life sleuthing. You guys know what sleuthing means? Investigating, right? Sleuthing, looking for clues. And he could always seemingly find the clues no one else could find. Now, some people think that that's a superpower of his. He's a genius, so he could just find these clues no one else could find. There's a third thing he did that he spent a third of his life doing that most of us don't take the time to do because we're not disciplined enough. He thought. Can you see him right now in his armchair playing the violin, thinking through a series of clues to come to an entrance to the best explanation? That's what he always did. He took all the clues and he went down every logical possibility in his mind until he came to one that put all the clues together in a best explanation. How many of us will take a thought that we have, pull it apart, put it back together, pull it apart, put it back together until we come to a proper conclusion? Most of us won't. But here's the thing. If you study, if you think through things, and if you look, you will find the clues you're most looking for. Carl Jung says that you will find the answers that you most need in the places you don't want to look. Most of us don't want to look in these places because we're afraid we'll find that answer. So when you are like Sherlock Holmes and you begin to look at the evidence and you study and you know these things, Watson and Scotland Yard, guess what? They were in the same place, they had the same evidence. Why didn't they see the same truth? Get the same revelation? It's because when you study, when you have your mind in the right place, you see the truth revealed to you. When you see truth revealed, you're like, there it is. So in the movie with Robert Downey Jr., there's a moment where Watson says, how did you see that? And Holmes says, because I was looking for it. So are you guys looking for the truth? So we're going to peel way back here. And you guys have 2 brain processes. The first brain process you guys work with is called reflexive. This is your conditioned responses. Someone says something to you, you get upset, you're happy, you laugh, whatever. You read something on Instagram, you see something on Twitter, and you fire up a tweet. Social media is a complete study of reflexive behavior. You see it. It's a hot part of your brain where somebody touches it, boom, 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 boom. It's hot. Reflexive is the part that's cool, collective, where you take time and pull things apart. They call, Marie Konnikova calls the reflexive part the hot part of the brain, the Watson part of the brain, and the reflective part she calls the Holmesian part of the brain. Now, how do we get to the point where we see most of our thinking through the reflective Holmesian part of the brain? I'm going to ask you guys a question. Honest answer. Do words have meaning? Does anyone think words are subjective and have no meaning? That's fantastic. Because you couldn't even understand the question I asked you and give me a response if words don't have meaning. There can be no equity of language. So this is your first lesson. This is the first lesson, the first tool to get, is words have meaning. Be precise in your language. Learn the correct words. Not all words are equal. Okay? There has been postmodernism taught for the last 50, 60 years that says all words are equal. My truth. Your truth. It's all equal. That all things are equal. That every opinion is equally valid. You know what I say? I disagree. That actually is a huge knockdown argument. If someone says all arguments are equally valid, and I say I disagree, I have totally trumped the argument. Because both things can't be true at the same time. Did you see that? I'm going to do it again. If all opinions are equally valid, and I say I disagree, that argument made first falls flat. Because if all arguments are equally valid, then I disagree is equal to all arguments are equally valid. Those two are contradictory. They can't be equal. And if mine is true, then theirs is false. This is where your brain needs to get to, guys. This is the first step. You're, how many, 18, 19 years old? It's fantastic. If you can get a hold of what I'm telling you, if you can start to discipline your mind to be able to think like this, to be able to stop, pull the thing apart, and say, do I want to believe this? Is this a good thought? Even your own thoughts go, is this a good thought for me to have in your mind? Stop it and go, is this a good thought? Most of us have this idea of a worldview. Does anybody know what a worldview is? Shout it out if you know what a worldview is. What is it? No, a worldview is how you see the world. How you see the world. So, you know what? And the very soul. Stepping out though. So your worldview is how you see the world. Now the thing is, you will defend your worldview. Have you ever noticed how someone will say something like, I think torturing babies for fun is wrong, but abortion's okay? And you're like, well, that doesn't seem to make sense. Why? Your arguments seem to contradict each other. You're like, we're not being consistent. Most people are consistent in their worldview. And their worldview, the premise of their worldview might be all Republicans are white supremacists. And if that's their worldview, anything that's outside of that norm is wrong. And so they can't reconcile anything out of that. So you guys have worldviews where if you're given information that's outside your worldview, you don't know what to do with it. So most of us come to university and you have this idea of Christianity, and when some atheists push back on you and you don't have the answers, you don't have the tools to answer them, your Christianity falls. And it falls for two reasons. Number one, you didn't really believe Christianity. You didn't actually have Christianity. Number two, you had a misunderstanding of what Christianity was. And when they pushed on it, it fell. And you know what? It needed to fall. Because if your Christian walk, if your belief in Jesus Christ cannot take the scrutiny of the world, then you don't have a true understanding of who Jesus Christ is. Yeah, let that sink in. So, what are some ways that we can pick up, that I can teach you guys really quickly, to be on the lookout for things in your life? And how you build up your worldview. Because you guys have one, but you don't even know what it is. Because you've been given little smatterings across your life. You're like, okay, I like this is good. I like this is good. I like this thought's good. And you take it, and you shake it together, and someone says, what do you believe? And you're like, here's what I believe. And you just throw it. It's like this mosaic of all kinds of different things. You need to be conscious and cognizant of what you believe and begin to write it out. How many of you would be brave enough to write on a piece of paper, I believe this about God, and give 3 defenses for it? If you're really brave, give it to one of your friends and let them read it. Or a family member, someone who won't hate you afterwards. And you can actually see if you can articulate what you believe. The problem is, we think we know what we believe. How many people have you heard say, oh, I'm going to write a book? Do you know how hard it is to write a book? Because you can have the idea up here, but getting it from here to here and to here is huge, gargantuan steps. Okay? So here's some things to look out for. You guys have phrases that you use all the time, and it's called rhetoric, right? Rhetoric has 2 uses. The first use of rhetoric is to take something complex and to make it more simple and understandable. The second thing is to take something simple and make it vague and veiled. So what you will notice, a lot of times people will use rhetoric when they don't want to answer a question, and they'll make something complex that doesn't need to be complex. Okay, so be on the lookout for rhetoric. If somebody gives you a talking point or a sound bite, you will not find truth in a sound bite or a talking point. Okay? So if all you're getting is a talking point, or someone just throws sound bites at you and you're arguing sound bite for sound bite and quip for quip, that's not a good conversation. Actually stop. What do you mean by that? Can you explain further? Everybody has presuppositions. You guys know what presuppositions are? There are things that you believe that you may not know that you believe that builds your worldview, and you need to figure out what those are. It could be, I think God is all-loving. I don't think anyone will go to hell. It could be a myriad of things. I think this is okay. I don't think this is okay. You have all these beliefs, and they all equal your worldview. And you need to figure out what those are. Because when someone comes to you and says, Christians are bigots, well, when they say that statement is layered super deep with hundreds of different tiny statements that form that belief. That's called presuppositions. Okay? Now, I won't be able to hit everything. So, the other thing I want you guys to begin to look at, is Aristotle's 3 laws of logic, correspondence theory, coherence theory, and then you guys need to study logical fallacies. If you guys begin to study logical fallacies, you will find out that 90% of the news is fallacious. And I'm not kidding. 90% of commercials have false advertising, and they have some kind of fallacy in there. A fallacy would be an ad hominem. Here's an ad hominem. Donald Trump is the worst president because he's orange. Okay? You're attacking his physical appearance rather than his policies, right? Or Hillary Clinton is an idiot. You see that pantsuit she's wearing? So you're going around the argument. So begin to study logical fallacies. I'll have a few minutes here. Before we get into some Q&A. Now, once you guys begin to master the study, okay, there's another discipline of your mind that you're going to need. And I promise you, if you guys take this to heart and you actually employ the things I'm telling you, in 4 or 5 years, you guys are going to be robust Christians who will be unabashedly resolute in the face of anyone. Okay? Spend 5 minutes a day, just 5 minutes a day, quieting your mind. 5 minutes a day. What does that mean? That means you just try to stop thoughts coming in. You don't do anything else. When a thought comes into your mind, basketball, girls, or guys, or whatever, you try to stop everything. It's like whack-a-mole, okay? And you're like, this is stupid. This is not going to work. My brain's, I'm too ADD, or I'm... Just spend 5 minutes a day just pushing, just stopping them, just getting the thoughts to stop. After you get good at that, maybe it'll take a week or maybe it'll take a month of you doing this, then you'll get really good at it. You'll be like a whack-a-mole ninja. You'll be just like smacking everything. I got that. Then start pushing those thoughts back. So when a thought comes in that's bad, a thought that says you're no good, that you're not worth anything, that no one cares about you, and shame starts to come in, you stop that thought. This is also the renewing of your mind by stopping those thoughts. You begin to push those thoughts away, and you push those thoughts away, and you push those thoughts away. And then you get really good at that. And then you push the thoughts away, and you can actually close the door, and they don't come back in. And then once you get really good at that, then you can bring good thoughts in. Here's something they found out in neuroscience, guys. This is why the mind is so amazing. They found out that you guys can have a negative thought pattern about yourself. You could be suicidal. You could have any kind of mental disorders, or you could have any kind of negative thought in yourself about who you are and this negative self-esteem and all that. You can have all this stuff on you. And if you begin to slowly change your thoughts, that thought pattern, that superhighway, that neural pathway in your brain will actually die inside your brain, and a new one will be born, and you can have a new thought. And so that means you can change that in your life. You can change that personality. You know, a lot of times our personality is simply bad habits. Did you guys know that? A lot of your personality, you say, that's just who I am. It's just a bad habit that you have. And if you begin to stop certain thoughts and begin to introduce new ones, you can actually have a neural transformation, a renewing of your mind. Guys, the mind is so powerful. They've been studying this for millennia upon millennia. And I had 30 minutes to try to get some ideas across to you about the mind. I hope I've said something that's helpful. Please ask me more questions, because I skipped through a lot of stuff here. And so I would love to talk to you guys more about other tools you can use about apologetics. I actually have a book called Unabashedly Resolute. and it's a small read, but it's a good foundational book. There's also Mere Christianity that I know that you guys are getting ready to start going through. I did an experiment on some teenage kids that was supervised. I asked a buddy of mine in Southland, I said, I have this thesis that I could teach Mere Christianity in the Bible to high school kids, and that they would become robust Christians after a year. And and after a year, the response was, oh, what do you think being a Christian is? It's like, well, I think it's hugging people, loving on people. It went from that to where these kids could absolutely defend their faith as good as any apologist I'd seen. And they were so robust. When kids asked them questions at school, they had an answer. And they had confidence. And suddenly they knew who they were in Christ. And it was amazing. So Mere Christianity is no joke. It is one of the most fundamental books you guys need. It should be the baseline of your Christianity. So that's what I have for you at this moment. We'll jump into a Q&A. So if I've said anything's on the table in Q&A. It could be theology. It could be apologetics. It could be about the mind. It could be about literature. I love literature. So it could be about Sherlock Holmes or C.S. Lewis. So if anyone's written any questions down, they're going to come along with microphones and help you out. If you're live, you can shout it right now.
Why don't take like 30 seconds, write it down on a little piece of paper, and then just raise your hand if you've got a question. I'll come around and Wes will pick you. So, Jake? Do you want to be?
She had the first question down here.
Oh, perfect. Sorry, ladies first.
You can say to the mic.
What have you found yourself thinking about on a day-to-day basis, and what has it taken you to get to this deeper level of thinking? To go along with this, how do you know what thoughts are worthwhile? How do you decide if something is good enough to dig deeper into? How do you distinguish that?
That's my good job, Heather.
Yeah. So, growing up, my father always taught me that do not take the pastor's word for it. You go home and you study the scriptures yourself. You get other books out, you study other things, and you try to prove him wrong. You try to prove yourself wrong. If you can't prove yourself wrong, you might be close to getting right. Okay? We can't know anything 100% for sure because we are temporal beings in an infinite universe that we're here for about 70 years, and we actually have good consciousness, probably 15 or 20 of our good years. From the time that we're babies until we're like 18, 19 years old, your frontal cortex is still growing. You're still getting conscious capacity that you guys don't have. So we have about 20 to 40 of good brain, and maybe it starts degrading after that. And so, but what do I think about every day? Well, I think about stuff like this. I challenge myself. I'm not afraid to take upon any thought, because the Bible, Jesus says that if you take up any serpent, they won't harm you. If you take any deadly poison, it won't hurt you. So I have learned how to research. I have learned how to think. And so what I do is I take a thought that someone gives me, and I pull it apart. I go, okay, let's look at this thought. Okay, where does it lead me? All right, well, that leads me down. That's not good. I pull it apart and go, does it fit back together? No, does it fit back together? And so what I found is if a thought is good, it will actually bring benefit not only to myself but to others. And if a thought is bad, one, it'll either violate the laws of logic. The three laws of logic are law of identity, which means A is equal to A, not A is equal to not A. Law of excluded middle, it can't be both A and B at the same time. So you can't have an A-B, it's either A or not A, or it can't be A and not A at the same time. Or the law of non-contradiction, which similarly says something very similar, that you can't have both a right and a wrong being correct at the same moment in time. So excluded middle means there can't be something in the middle that says, well, we're in the gray area on this. That doesn't work like that in logic. And so then I read the correspondence theory. Does it correspond to reality? If it corresponds to reality, that gives a little more weight to it. Then is it coherent? Does it make sense? Because there's some things that can be logically valid, but not actually logically coherent. Like it doesn't make sense, even though it's logically it works out in a syllogism. And so I begin to look at those things. And then I go to logical fallacies, and I run through a list of logical fallacies. Does it violate any of these logical fallacies? Then you go to Scripture. Because here's the thing, good thoughts will actually increase your life, it will increase your value, and you will find that it bears fruit. Bad thoughts will not. Okay. Next.
Great question and great answer. Okay, now we've got Jay.
So, what's your personal favorite piece by C.S. Lewis, and then what's your personal favorite piece by Tolkien as well?
My personal favorite of Lewis is Abolition of Man. And That Hideous Strength, which is a fictionalization of Abolition of Man. Abolition of Man is where I first got my taste into, when I mentioned do words have meaning, that's where I first got to sink my teeth in the fact, do words, because he talks about words having meaning. Do they have meaning, or can you just generate anything? If words don't have meaning, then you can just create any kind of reality you want, and then suddenly people will be unmoored and untethered from reality and just off on an infinite sea of nothingness. And so what Lewis says in Abolition of Man is, be careful how you learn, it shapes who you become. And so that to me really struck home. Tolkien, actually I like Leaf by Niggle by Tolkien is probably one of my favorites. I mean, Lord of the Rings is the obvious choice, but Leaf by Niggle is about a painter, and he paints this tree and all these leaves. He spends his whole life painting leaves on a tree. People think it's a waste of time until they get to heaven and they see the exact tree that he's been painting for his entire life. And so it's saying that the art you do on earth actually has, you're either seeing glimpses of heaven or you're actually creating it in heaven in a sense. Like the art that you see, the things you do on life will have eternal value even though it doesn't look like it here on earth. I think that's a beautiful message.
Another question? Red Peach.
Alright, so this question is kind of specific, but I think it's something that at least I've had a lot of interaction with in the current world we live in. For like a lot of Christians in my hometown, a lot of them have begun to accept homosexuality as being okay theologically and in the Bible. And more specifically, what a lot of them refer to is the Hebrew that is used in places like Genesis and Leviticus, and the many times by Paul in the New Testament about sodomites and sodomy. And they try to argue that homosexuality isn't what is the focus in those different passages, where in our current English translations it specifically says homosexuality. So how do you combat that?
Well, that's a fantastically pointed question. So I have some friends of mine who are at RZIM with Robbie, Sam Mulberry, David Bennett, and there's also a book by Wesley Walls, I think, Wesley Hill, Washington Waiting, and we had great interaction one day with somebody who was transitioning, and then somebody who was, they said, I am gay, but I don't engage in that. I choose Christ over my relationships in that manner. And Sam Mulberry is very similar, and David Bennett is very similar in that. They choose not to engage with that. They're like, I have this feeling, I have this thought. It's there, I can't do anything about the thought, but I don't have to engage with the thought. I don't have to take that action. And the other person that was transitioning, it was really tough to watch because their whole argument was, well, I feel this way, and therefore God accepts me because this is who I am. And they didn't have any real theological words. Now, what you're talking about there, that theology, it's interesting because if you start to pull that thread, it's a slippery slope to go down. And I've heard this from say, Sam Mulberry and David Bennett and some other people on the other side. And there's those that say, Paul didn't know what he was talking about. He was wrong. And then Sam and David are here going, if we start down that road, where do we stop? You know? And so they're like, we're standing firm here. This is the interesting thing. If you guys have read the Bible through, the Bible is not shy about sex. The Bible is not shy about much. And in the whole 3,500 years of history that's been written about, there's never been an example of a covenant marriage in homosexuality. And that's just the point. It's not been, and they weren't, I mean, there's some stuff in the Old Testament that's pretty rough. So the Bible's not shy. And I know absence of evidence is not evidence of absence in that sense, but to me it gives weight to the notion of if there is all of this negative towards that kind of relationship, but there is no positive to counterbalance it, is there any benefit in that relationship? And engaging in that relationship. Now I'm not talking about people who identify as homosexual, I'm talking about the engagement in that relationship, the relationship itself. So the Bible's pretty clear one way, I think, even though you can pull these things and say, well, the Hebrew here, the Hebrew there, but it never speaks about it in good terms. It never says, no, this part of homosexuality actually is good and this covenant is good. And so since we're in sort of a situation that I would tend to go more homosexual people who aren't engaging in that. And I know that's tough, but I mean, Wesley Hill wrote that book, Watching and Waiting, and he's like, my relationship with Christ is more important than any relationship that I would enact upon with another man. And I think that's the correct answer, because you can read Wesley Hill's book and you can put whatever sin you're dealing with, where he says homosexuality, and it would read exactly the same. And I think that's what makes it, has a ring of truth to it.
Cool. We've got time for like 2 more questions. One right here.
Okay, so how do we know what is morally good or bad and agree with it if we are testing whether or not the Bible should be our basis of morality?
Say it again.
How do we know what is morally good or bad and agree with it if we are testing whether or not the Bible should be our basis of morality?
Well, I think by testing it, what are your other options?
I don't know.
So here's the thing. C.S. Lewis starts out Mere Christianity by saying quarreling. Quarreling is a great evidence that morality is an objective truth. Right? Quarreling. Now think about that. This is one of these things, when you read C.S. Lewis, you're going to find yourself thinking a lot more. Just a real quick thing here. Thinking is not following a thought. Thinking is wrestling with a thought with dialogue of opposition to what you're thinking. That is real thinking. If you're just following a thought, that's not thinking. You're just following a thought. That's almost like propaganda. Right? If you know what you're thinking before you start thinking it, it's not a thought. If you're thinking something, if you're going to write an essay and you know the beginning, middle, and end before you even start to write the essay, that's propaganda. That's not writing. You have to wrestle through truths, because you're going to come to some research and you're like, ooh, this actually puts an objection against what I'm talking about here, and you have to wrestle that out. And so you should never know the end of an essay before you start writing it. Now, to get back to your point about morality, one of the other options. So if there is such thing as right or wrong, this is what Robbie says. If there's such thing as right or wrong, then there is a moral law. If there is a moral law, there is a moral lawgiver. If there's a moral lawgiver, then we should be beholden to what his moral law is. The other option is there is no moral law, and I can do anything to anybody, and it's moral relativism. But is that beneficial to any society? It's not. There is moral relativism. Relativism says I can do whatever I want. But does that benefit society at all? So there was a guy one time that actually told Robbie, he said, why are you afraid of moral relativism? They do it in China. They do it all over the world. We're not going to be raping and killing and pillaging people. Robbie asked him one question. He said, do you lock your doors at night? The guy said, yes. He goes, why? If we're not going to do those things you say we're not going to do, then why would you lock your doors unless you're afraid that moral relativism, it won't hold society up. Right? So we know there's a moral right and wrong because we quarrel and we argue. We're trying to find truth. We're trying to find meaning in life. If there is no right and wrong, there is no meaning to life. If there is no meaning to life, then there's no purpose. If there's no purpose, you're denialism. See how quickly that went? And so that's how we know. And so we look for what piece of literature, what thing can I look to that will help me understand and find truth. And so you look through all the things. You look through atheism. So little personal testimony of mine. I actually was a minister for about 9 years, and then I had a crisis of faith, and I actually became a militant atheist for about 2 years. I went through Hinduism, I went through Islam, and I wound up with atheism because I rejected Christianity. That was no good, so the only thing left was actually atheism. And I thought, I am so enlightened, I am so smart, I'm smarter than everybody else. All my Christian friends are idiots for believing in God. That Bible is antiquated, it's out of date. I went through all the arguments. What I found out was when I actually pulled atheism apart, every road in atheism, every vein of thought led to nihilism. You guys know what nihilism is? No hope, no purpose, no meaning, nothing. It ends, you're dead, game over. That's it. Every path of atheism led to nihilism, and then one path led to deterministic nihilism. You know what that is? Deterministic nihilism is that you had no choice, that from the moment that the Big Bang happened, the entire universe dictated what you would do, what you would say, and then there's nothing. So you didn't have a choice in your life. And I said, well, these are my options. Here's the thing, guys. There are only 3 thoughts about God. There aren't billions. There are 3 thoughts about God. There's theism, atheism, and monism. There is a supreme being. There is no supreme being. Everything is God. Those are the only 3 thoughts about God. So you don't have to go out and search the entire universe to find truth. There are only 3 thoughts about God. There are only 3 thoughts about how the universe got here. Chance, necessity, or design. That's it. So once you start to see these things start to narrow down, and suddenly finding truth becomes much, much easier.
Awesome. Okay, last question. I think I want to, okay. Dang, isn't that smart?
All right. So, what has been the biggest challenge you faced, I guess, against Christianity or against your own faith, and how did you combat that?
Well, the main argument against Christianity is suffering and the problem of evil. That's the main thing. That if there's a good God, why would He let people suffer? And that's a hard one because it's true. What's interesting, though, is Jordan Peterson talks about that Descartes got it wrong. When Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, he actually said it should be, I suffer, therefore I am, because suffering is the one thing that is equal and equitable across all humanity. Viktor Frankl said that he was a concentration camp survivor. Viktor Frankl said that no matter how much pain you have in the pain box, it fills the entire pain box. Like you have this box in your mind where pain is. And no matter how little a drop of pain goes in there, it fills the entire thing. The thing is, it can never be full. So we all have suffering. So how do you deal with that? There's a good God. How do you deal with the fact that there is suffering? So, 2 ways. Number 1, God created us. We have life because He created us. That's the only reason we have life. He might have a reason to allow suffering. We have this much consciousness, and we have a drop in the ocean of consciousness and of knowledge. He's omniscient. He might have a reason to allow suffering. Who am I to judge a supreme, greatest being ever? That's one tiny answer. It's not neat, it's not clean. That's an answer. The other answer is, what's the alternative? I mean, it's the same thing I asked the gentleman over here. What's the alternative? So the people who usually bring the problem of pain, like Sam Harris and your Daniel Dennison guys, they bring the problem of evil up and the problem of suffering. What their argument is, suffering is a brute fact. Suck it up. How is that better? At least Jesus Christ offers hope. At least He suffers with you. At least He offers a destiny and a purpose. And actually, Friedrich Nietzsche actually said, if you can figure out a why, you can survive any how. Atheism doesn't even give you a why. And Richard Dawkins says you can't ask why. You just have to accept it. So how is that answered? So what you do is you look at the other people. How are other religions, how are other philosophies answering the problem of suffering? And actually, the best answer to suffering is Jesus Christ came down, suffered, and died for us to raise us and reconcile us up to Him. And so now we sit in heavenly places with Christ Jesus. That is the best answer in the entire history of the world. And you know why? Because the Bible says He was slain before the foundation of the world. He already knew it was going to happen. It's not a big deal to Him. He knew it. And He had a plan in place. It's the only option on the table that gives hope. And hope is extremely, extremely powerful.
Amen. Let's give it up for life.